have some breaking news now on the politics lead. New information about the FBI agent dismissed from Robert Mueller's special counsel investigation. Over the weekend, we learned that this top counterintelligence expert was removed by Mueller after exchanging text messages that appeared to mock President Trump. And now, new CNN reporting, breaking right now, on the agent's role in the Hillary Clinton email probe. I want to bring in CNN's Laura Jarrett. And Laura, records show messages by this agent raised questions about whether or not justice was truly blind in the investigation into Hillary Clinton.
Well, Jake, sources we have learned from tell us that the electronic records show that Peter Strzok changed former FBI Director James Comey earlier draft language describing Clinton's actions in handling classified materials from, quote, grossly negligent to extremely careless. Now, this entire drafting process was a team effort at the FBI, we're told, as we reported last month after the news surfaced that the language had in fact been softened, that Comey and his colleagues had been playing with the language for some time. But the identity of the person who actually made the change had not been known until now. Take a listen to what Comey said, clearing the former Secretary of State back in 2016.
Although we did not find clear evidence that Secretary Clinton or her colleagues intended to violate laws governing the handling of classified information, there is evidence that they were extremely careless in their handling of very sensitive, highly classified information.
Now, this key shift from grossly negligent to extremely careless may seem like mere semantics, but it actually reflects a decision that the FBI could have had a potentially serious legal implication here, as the federal law that actually governs the handling of classified materials establishes criminal penalties for gross negligence. So the change there actually is legally significant. But from an optics standpoint, certainly the news of Strzok's direct role in this statement that ultimately cleared Clinton, combined with the fact that he was dismissed from special counsel Robert Mueller's team after exchanging these private messages with an FBI lawyer, could be seen as favoring Clinton politically, may now give further ammunition to those seeking ways to discredit special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia probe. Jake.
All right, Laura Jarrett, thank you so much for that breaking news. Let's bring the panel back. Potentially, good news for President Trump, who wants to discredit this investigation any way he can. Scott.
Yeah, no question. Look, Republicans deep down have always felt that the Clintons were always able to somehow stay one step ahead of the law, whether that was during the Clinton administration or Hillary's campaign. You know, these issues have fueled Republican Party Lincoln Day dinner speeches for years. And so when these kinds of things come out, the president's going to be on it every day for the rest of his term. You're going to have Republican senators on it. You're going to have party chairs around the country all over it. It really does make it more difficult for an investigation to be conducted now that Republicans don't always say, well, you know, they had all those Clinton people working on it. And so, if you're somebody who's interested in fair investigations, now you're going to have one political party that was already skeptical saying, yeah, but, and that's where we're headed.
Although we should point out, as the FBI argues and the special counsel's team argue, they found out about this and they dismissed him from the probe. So it wasn't like they weren't sensitive to these issues. Yeah, but go ahead.
This underscores President Trump's argument that the FBI is a politicized organization, right? If they changed the language in a way that Hillary Clinton was let off easier, I mean, she still lost the election. I'm not sure it would have changed the outcome of the election. But that change from gross negligence to extreme carelessness is very important, as Laura said. And the FBI has a broader explanation to the American people to make about why that change was made. Comey has said that he disagreed with that. Maybe he's going to come out and talk about it in his book in the spring. I don't know. But it would behoove the agency's credibility to come out with that story sooner rather than later.
Paul, I'm going to let you have the last word.
An aneurysm. That's what I'm going to have live on the air.
When we come back, we have to take a very quick break. And I'm coming to you first. More when we come back. Stay with us. And we're back with the politics lead. Just before the break, we reported a source telling CNN's Laura Jarrett that the FBI agent dismissed from the Russia investigation for alleged anti-Trump text messages was the same agent who softened former FBI Director James Comey's draft language describing Clinton's actions in handling classified materials from, quote, grossly negligent to extremely careless, a softening that had legal ramifications. Paul Begala, I promised you a response. Go.
Right. That statement, that phrase, extremely careless, back when it was uttered, CNN said it was the single most damaging aspect of Mr. Comey's statement. And by the way, Mr. Comey's statement itself was an outrage. The FBI is supposed to investigate and refer. They put up or shut up. They're not allowed under Justice Department guidelines to call a press conference and attack a private citizen who's running for president, basically make a negative ad for Donald Trump. Oh, and then if that's not enough, 11 days before the election, reopen it again, which cost her the White House. So you think Donald Trump doesn't like Jim Comey? He takes a backseat to me.
This does seem significant, though, potentially when it comes to President Trump pushing back, and maybe even if Michael Flynn, is he allowed to withdraw his guilty plea?
No. Well, I mean, you can't withdraw your guilty plea, certainly because of something as minor as this. But look, this will give supporters of the president a way to attack the Mueller investigation, which they really haven't had so far. I mean, this investigation has been without leaks. It has been without controversy in terms of its internal organization. So the opportunity to say there was an anti-Trump FBI agent will be one way of attacking. I don't think it's going to make any difference legally, but politically it is a tool which will certainly be picked up over at Fox News and, you know, among the president's supporters.
Amanda, the president's already been attacking the credibility of the FBI, writing on Twitter, quote, after years of Comey with the phony and dishonest Clinton investigation and more running the FBI, its reputation is in tatters, worst in history. A lot of FBI officials, a lot of FBI former directors and such saying that's not true. But this will feed into the idea of, as you say, if this is a politicized organization.
Yeah, and this is a long-running narrative that President Trump has set to paint the FBI as a tarnished organization that cannot be trusted to leave a fair investigation against him. This is why he always talks about the witch hunt, the ruse, the hoax, the constant, you know, criticism that he has for the agency. And I do think he was effective in sort of making former FBI Director James Comey a poster boy of the deep state. When you tune into talk radio, you talk about this deep state campaign against President Trump. Now he has, you know, a vector to do that against Special Counsel Mueller. I don't know if they'll be going with it, but even people like Newt Gingrich have been talking about the campaign donations that people have made that are working on this campaign, and so this just continues to feed into that.
But where is Jeff Sessions? Where is, you know, where is Chris Wray, the new FBI director, who say this isn't a bad FBI? I mean, the idea that the president of the United States can attack the FBI with no pushback from the people who run the FBI is just outrageous.
Well,
and you know, one text was unwise. There's no question about that. But the idea that this taints thousands of FBI agents and staff people who do phenomenal work every day is just repellent.
Yeah, and I said this before, and I will say it again. If I were a reporter on Capitol Hill right now, I'd be running to stick a microphone in every Republican senator's face to say, do you think obstruction of justice is a crime worthy of impeachment or not? They may not be willing to answer the question yet, but if he keeps going this route to damaging the FBI, I think it's a question worth asking.
And it doesn't, and this, Mr. Strzok, this FBI agent in charge, it doesn't change anything. The one that has been removed from the investigation, it doesn't change anything about what we know about the president's actions and the questions about his potential obstruction of justice, or the fact that Flynn pleaded guilty and two others were indicted, one other, Papadopoulos, had a plea agreement. It doesn't really change it. It might change the subject for some people, as we were derailed here for a little bit as well, but it doesn't change the facts of the Trump investigation, as it were.
That's right, but it does change the politics a little bit, right? It changes how the public perceives the investigation, and as was pointed out earlier, it could change the politics of an impeachment proceeding. Impeachment is a political action, not a legal action. And so, and it also just, you know, when you're under siege like the Trump White House is and you're being suffocated, a little bit of oxygen like this is enough to reinvigorate your mounting a public defense. And I suspect that's what we're going to see as an aggressive defense over the next few days using this point.
Everyone stick around. Our conversation about President Trump and the possibility of obstruction of justice charges continues. Next, we're going to talk to Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, who is on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Stay with us. We're back, sticking with our politics lead. Did President Trump obstruct justice by tweeting that he fired former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn for lying to the vice president and the FBI, and then for allegedly pushing Comey to protect Flynn after he was fired? Joining me now is a Democratic senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin. He's on the Senate Intelligence Committee. Senator, good to see you as always. I want to get your reaction to the president's lawyer saying that the president cannot obstruct justice. By definition, he's the chief law enforcement officer of the country. Do you agree? Can the president just, is it impossible for the president to obstruct justice?
I don't agree. I just think the rule of law means the rule of law. It means that we're all held accountable, and there's no two systems for two different types of people. In West Virginia, when I was governor, I had the same standards as set by every individual in my state. So we all have to live by the rule of law, and Madam Justice is blind. That's why in so many of the statues you see on courthouses, there's a blindfold on Madam Justice, and that's the reason.
Your colleague in the Senate, Dianne Feinstein, said that the Senate investigation involves obstruction of justice. Does this news move that part of the investigation in that direction, do you think?
I don't know if Diane was talking about the Judicial Committee. They work in a different direction than what we're working on right now. The Intelligence Committee, we've had about 100 people come in and been interviewed. And there's quite a few more to be done. So I don't see this thing wrapping up anytime soon, Jake. They're just crossing every T, dotting every I. And we'll be bringing certain people back another time for all the committee, and hopefully in an open committee where the public can observe. So there's quite a ways to go on this, but Mr. Mueller is doing an unbelievable job, and he's on top of this thing, and we're not trying to interfere. And I think these teams are working where they can, sharing what they can, but both going in two separate paths.
So Laura Jarrett from CNN just broke the story that this FBI agent who was on the Clinton investigation and on the Mueller investigation has now been reassigned because of alleged anti-Trump texts that he sent. He's now working in like the Human Resources Department of the FBI. Jarrett says that he is the one that softened the language that Comey used in describing Hillary Clinton's actions, changing them from grossly negligent to extremely careless, which of course it had serious criminal ramifications in the sense that grossly negligent is there's a penalty involved, extremely careless there isn't. Does this concern you?
Well, it concerns me from this standpoint that person would have been involved. And one other thing that I feel very comfortable about is that the quality of Mr. Mueller himself, the character that he has established and who he is, and his professionalism, and that's why he has bipartisan support. That's why both sides, Democrats and Republicans, believe he's the right person to basically go through this process and come out with a conclusion, and justice will be done.
Listen to this sound from President Trump on Saturday after Flynn pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI.
Yeah.
What has been shown is no collusion. No collusion. There's been absolutely no collusion, so we're very happy.
So we've been focused today on obstruction of justice, but you're on the Intelligence Committee. Have you seen any concrete evidence of collusion?
I think they're going through that, Jake, line by line right now, finding out if there's connecting dots where dots can be connected. I don't think there's not any set premise of what this investigation's about except getting to the facts and getting to the truth. What we do know, Russia was definitely involved. Their intent was to do as much damage as possible. How far it goes up the chain, if there was collusion to where people were working together, that will come out if it's there. But we do know for a fact that Russia was involved. That cannot be disputed. And that's what we're working on. It'll take us wherever it does. Mr. Mueller will do his, we'll do ours, the House will do theirs, and we'll find out how they match up, how well they come and concur.
In the wee hours Saturday morning, Republicans on a party line vote, 51-49, passed the tax bill. You voted against it. Senator Chuck Grassley is getting hammered for saying the following, and I wanted to get your thoughts. Quote, "I think not having the estate tax recognizes the people that are investing as opposed to those that are just spending every darn penny they have, whether it's on booze or women or movies." Grassley has now said his comments were taken out of context. I'm not exactly sure what context could explain them. But are you concerned about this bill being bad for the middle class?
Well, Jake, here was the thing. I want this bill, I think there needs to be tax reform. I want this bill to be a bipartisan bill. I thought that's how the bill started. I was invited to the White House. They reached out to me. We worked all we could. We gave our ideas back and forth. We shared things that we thought that Democrats like myself, conservative Democrats, centrist Democrats, moderate Democrats would be able to coalesce around, and we tried that. The president himself said to me, he said, "Hey, Joe, this bill we're going to be working on is not going to be a tax cut for the rich, for the billionaires and millionaires like myself. This is going to be for the working class that got left behind. We want to make sure they get the tax cuts." I said, "Mr. President, that would be great." Well, what I saw, and when I finally did see what I have of this bill, it's not what I was told it was going to be. So, and Mitch, I will say this, Senator McConnell and the leadership, I don't think had any intention of making this a bipartisan bill. I tried more ways than one, Jake, reached out. You know, and the bottom line is, should the bill not be permanent for the working class? Should the bill not be permanent for the small businesses? Should they not have had the same guarantees as we gave the large corporations? And the only reason that they said they couldn't do it was because of the budget reconciliation and the gimmick that they're working under. Don't work under that. Why don't you take Ronald Reagan's lead? He worked for a year or more, brought everyone together. In the end, he got 97 votes, 97 senators out of 100. That's what we should be doing here. But I will say this, Jake, there was not one intent, not one serious intent of getting me or any other Democrat to vote for a piece of legislation which was put together the way this was, not one hearing, not bringing one of our ideas together. I've said this, you need to reduce the corporate tax. We need to be competitive. Do you need to go clear to 20? I don't think right now you do.
All right, Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, thank you so much, sir. Always good to see you.
Thank you, Jake.
Lots more to talk about, including President Trump fully endorsing accused child molester Roy Moore. My panel will weigh in when we come back. Stay with us. We're back with the politics lead. In a tweet this morning, President Trump formally endorsed for the U.S. Senate Judge Roy Moore, a candidate about whom credible allegations have been made that as a man in his 30s, he sexually molested a 14-year-old girl and sexually assaulted a 16-year-old girl. In comments about Moore, the president's daughter Ivanka Trump previously said there's a special place in hell for people who prey on children. Today, her father said there's a special place in the Senate for them. We can see the mainstreaming of this in the change in tone of comments from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
I think he should step aside. I believe the women, yes.
When the accusations first surfaced, McConnell and Senate Republican leaders explored options to keep Moore from becoming a member of the Senate, but this weekend only offered this option.
I think we're going to let the people of Alabama decide a week from Tuesday who they want to send to the Senate, and then we'll address the matter appropriately.
My panel is still with me. Scott, let me start with you, since you are a friend and confidant of McConnell. The emphasis has changed. The emphasis was, I believe the women, we're trying to get him out, we're trying to look for a solution, and now it's, we're going to let the people of Alabama decide.
Well, they are going to decide, because all roads to change, end, or alter this election died at the hands of the Alabama governor. So everything's off the table. There's going to be an election, and if Moore wins, then the Senate Ethics Committee, I suspect, is going to immediately investigate what happened. I mean, in Alabama, everybody's saying, well, you know, there's no due process here, and, you know, how do we know they're telling the truth? Roy Moore says the women are liars. Well, there's not going to be a court hearing over this stuff in Alabama. The closest thing to due process these women may get is to be able to come to the Senate and under oath tell their story. So if I'm Roy Moore and my position is they're all liars, well, he should welcome an ethics investigation, because then people have to go under oath and tell their story.
I've got to say, I find the whole idea of these endless Senate investigations to do allegations against male U.S. senators to be tiring and frustrating. I'm sorry, the U.S. Senate doesn't exist to investigate the sexual histories of male senators. We could do better than this, I would think. But two things. There's two prominent women that President Trump has undermined the White House. One is Kellyanne Conway, who said that there's no U.S. Senate seat worth more than a child, and then his daughter. So, you know, not even just as a woman, just as a person, as someone who worked in the Senate, I am concerned about the reputational damage of that institution, because it seems darn intent on protecting its reputation as a good old boys club.
Initially, it seemed like Moore wasn't going to comment on the charges, specifically about the individuals, which is what a lawyer will tell you to do, because if you call them liars, you subject yourself to a defamation suit. But then Roy Moore did start saying that they were all lies. Lee Korfman, this is the woman, the Alabama woman who makes the charge about Judge Moore molesting her when she was 14 years old. She wrote an open letter to Roy Moore at alabama.com. Quote, "What you did to me when I was 14 years old should be revolting to every person of good morals. But now you're attacking my honesty and integrity. Where does your immorality end?"
That's powerful testimony. Will it move voters, though? It is a dead heat race. And that's just an honest commentary on where we are politically. I have a lot of friends in Alabama. My mother used to live in Alabama. It's a great place. But this is a time of intense partisanship like I've never seen before in my life. And it looks like a whole lot of Alabamians would rather vote for an accused child molester than a Democrat. But there is another option. There's a guy by the name of Lee Busby, a retired Marine colonel, who is running as a write-in. And you are going to see, I've talked to Alabamians about this, you're going to see Republicans, but Busby is a Republican, Colonel Busby. They're going to, I think some people who can't stomach Roy Moore, because of these accusations, have now a third option in Colonel Busby, and you may see a little bleeding off of more support over Colonel Busby.
I have to say this, Scott. I mean, the president's embrace of him today is full-throated, not just tweeting, but also a phone call, and we're told that at the end of the phone call, Trump said, "Go get him, Roy," which is kind of an odd thing to say to an accused child molester.
Yeah, look, early on, I thought the president should have thrown Roy Moore overboard. I think he's going to regret embracing Roy Moore, whether he wins or loses. Roy Moore, there's no empirical evidence Roy Moore is going to support the president's agenda. Number one, he opposed the last-ditch effort to repeal Obamacare this summer. Number two, in Alabama, everybody knows he's largely a creation of the liberal trial bar of Alabama. I think the president is going to regret getting involved in this, whether Moore comes or loses. Because either outcome is bad for the party. It's going to hurt the party's image, going to hurt the party's brand. The right thing here would be to do what he said. Vote for the other guy. If you don't want to vote for a Democrat, write somebody else in, because a Republican, the party does not need this.
Billy Bush, meanwhile, is making a comeback, or at least attempting one, Amanda. He wrote in an op-ed after hearing, of course, the New York Times reporting that President Trump is denying that it's his voice on the Access Hollywood tape. He wrote, "Yes, it is your voice." And he talks about how establishing a relationship with Trump helped his career. Quote, "Was I acting out of self-interest? You bet I was. Was I alone? Far from it. With Mr. Trump's outsized viewership back in 2005, everybody from Billy Bush on up to the top brass on the 52nd floor had to stoke the ego of the big cash cow along the way to higher earnings. None of us were guilty of knowingly enabling our future president, but all of us were guilty of sacrificing a bit of ourselves in the name of success." Do you buy the Billy Bush comeback tour here?
I don't know if I buy it, but I think there's a lot of truth in that last part of his statement, that a lot of people sacrifice themselves in pursuit of success, because I saw that during the Republican convention. I saw that during Donald Trump's campaign. And so I'm not sure what Billy Bush's motives were behind writing that op-ed, but man, I identify with that part of his op-ed.
And just to reiterate this thing, Scott, about McConnell and where McConnell is on this, I think a lot of people really gained. I heard from a lot of Democrats who heard when McConnell said, "I believe the women," which was kind of like a groundbreaking assertion by any senator, not to mention a Senate Majority Leader. And now he seems to be kind of just resigned to the fact that Roy Moore is going to be the next senator, although he won't necessarily be.
Well, I don't know that he's resigned to the fact that Moore's going to win. I mean, God bless anybody who's trying to model a sample for a poll in this race. A special election in the middle of December with this stuff going on. So I don't think we know what's going to happen. But the fact is, a lot of effort was made to try to get the governor of Alabama to move this election back or to disown Roy Moore. And she wouldn't do it. And McConnell was in the middle, of course, of trying to make that happen. So there's going to be an election, and he'll deal with it if Moore gets to Washington.
Thanks, one and all. You guys were great. Thank you so much. A stark and terrifying warning from the National Security Advisor. North Korea and Kim Jong-un are closer than ever to war. That's ahead. Stay with us. Thanks, Brianna. That 70s show, The President's Lawyer, now echoing Richard Nixon. The lead starts right now. John Dowd, President Trump's attorney, suggesting the president is above obstruction of justice laws, as the world learns that the president knew Michael Flynn had lied to the FBI before that alleged Comey meeting where he told the FBI director to lay off Flynn. It's a tangled web, as a key Democratic senator talks about the case against the president. More backing, more problems. President Trump is now officially and publicly supporting the man accused of molesting a 14-year-old and assaulting a 16-year-old. McConnell and Paul Ryan may have said they believe the women, but the president wants a vote for tax cuts and the wall. Plus, rumblings of war. Stealth fighter jets joining massive military drills on the Korean Peninsula as Kim Jong-un threatens a nuclear attack. What options does President Trump have left? Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to The Lead. I'm Jake Tapper. We have breaking news this afternoon. White House counsel Don McGahn told President Trump back in January, CNN has learned, that he believed then National Security Advisor Michael Flynn had misled the FBI during their January 24th interview with Flynn and lied to Vice President Mike Pence. A source familiar with the matter told CNN today. This means that the president knew Flynn had potentially committed a felony when, according to then FBI Director James Comey, on February 14th, after the president had fired Flynn, he said to Comey, quote, "I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. He is a good guy. I hope you can let this go." Now, if the president was aware that Flynn had likely committed a federal crime when he made that alleged request, which the president disputes, that raises serious questions of potential obstruction of justice, though This morning, the president's lawyer, John Dowd, claimed such a thing was, by definition, impossible. In a new interview with Axios, Dowd said, quote, "The president cannot obstruct justice because he is the chief law enforcement officer under the Constitution's Article 2 powers and has every right to express his view of any case," unquote. In other words, the president is, according to Dowd, above this law. Kindly remember that one of then candidate Trump's pitches to voters last year was that the Clintons thought of themselves as above the law, but that he would be different.
No one will be above the law. We will have one set of rules for everyone.
That argument perhaps not as compelling with an asterisk and fine print, but the news that the president knew Flynn had misled the FBI before that alleged conversation with Comey began over the weekend, after Flynn, of course, pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI. Trump tweeted, quote, "I had to fire General Flynn because he lied to the vice president and the FBI. He has pled guilty to those lies," unquote. Now, the president's tweet prompted no fewer than 43 question marks from former director of the U.S. Government Ethics Office, Walter Schaub. He asked, "Are you admitting you knew Flynn had lied to the FBI when you asked Comey to back off Flynn?" And then multiple question marks. Now, if the president did know when he allegedly asked former FBI Director James Comey to halt his investigation of Flynn, then, according to Senator Dianne Feinstein, the ranking Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee, well then...
I think what we're beginning to see is the putting together of a case of obstruction of justice.
But wait, the president's lawyer, John Dowd, now claims that he is the one who wrote that potentially incriminating tweet, which might make understandable then his announcement today that no president can commit the act of obstruction of justice. Though, to be fair, this whole defense seemed to be somewhat in the works back in June when I asked a different Trump attorney, Jay Sekulow, whether he and the rest of Trump's legal team believed the president was incapable of obstructing justice.
You're talking about what's called the constitutional threshold question, and that is, can a president who has the constitutional authority to take a certain action then be prosecuted for taking the action? If there is an investigation, right now there's not, you would, of course, raise the constitutional issues. Any lawyer, especially those that do it at the Supreme Court of the United States, like I do, you raise the constitutional issue threshold. That's number one.
The Trump legal team is now raising that constitutional issue, regardless of the fact that such an argument is a complete contradiction from what candidate Trump promised voters.
No one is above the law. Clinton and her cronies will say anything, do anything, lie about anything to keep their grip on power, to keep their control over our country.
Again, we'll remind you, broken campaign promises are not a crime. But speaking of Clinton, it is worth remembering that in December 1998, the House of Representatives impeached her husband, Bill Clinton, and one of those two articles of impeachment was obstruction of justice. And of course, in July 1974, the House Judiciary Committee voted on bringing forth 3 articles of impeachment against President Nixon, and one of them was obstruction of justice. So previous Congresses, Democrat and Republican, have disagreed with these arguments coming from all the president's men. Though see if this argument sounds familiar to you.
What you're saying is that there are certain situations, and the Houston plan, or that part of it was one of them, where the president can decide that it's in the best interest of the nation or something, and do something illegal.
Well, when the president does it, that means that it is not illegal.
My panel's with me now. Jeffrey Toobin, let me start with you. Okay. How significant is it that Don McGahn, the White House counsel, said he has told President Trump that Flynn had lied to the FBI in January before the president allegedly tried to tell Comey to back off?
It's very significant because it's one thing to tell James Comey, you know, leave Mike Flynn alone. He's a good guy. He's done service to his country. There's certainly nothing wrong with that sentiment if that's the real motivation for the comment. However, if Donald Trump knows that Mike Flynn has committed a crime and then the president asks for mercy, asks for no prosecution of Mike Flynn to the FBI director, who is in charge of that investigation, that is very problematic and could be part of a case for obstruction of justice.
And there's one other thing that's interesting in all this. On January 24th, that's when Flynn was interviewed by the FBI and lied.
correct.
On the 26th, the acting Attorney General, Sally Yates, told the White House, hey, Flynn's lying to you guys. He did talk about sanctions with the Russians. On the 27th, she went over to the White House, met with Don McGahn. McGahn told President Trump about what Yates had said. That same day, the president calls Comey, invites him over for dinner, and asks him to pledge his loyalty.
Right. I mean, the whole relationship of the president to Comey, as Comey recounted in that unforgettable testimony earlier this year, suggests that he was trying to stop the investigation. And it culminated, of course, on May 9th when he fired James Comey to end the investigation. This is the core of the obstruction of justice case. Even more than the comments about Flynn, the idea that the president fired the FBI director because the FBI director was investigating the president, that's always going to be the heart of the obstruction of justice investigation.
And he can't stop talking about Flynn. Amanda, take a listen to President Trump talking to reporters this morning.
Well, I feel badly for General Flynn. I feel very badly. He's led a very strong life, and I feel very badly, John. I will say this. Hillary Clinton lied many times to the FBI. Nothing happened to her.
I think there's a little bit of panic setting in among Republicans, realizing that this is becoming an obstruction of justice investigation. There's a reason why many Trump supporters and Trump himself would say you're not going to prove collusion. You can tune into anywhere in conservative talk radio and say you will never be able to prove collusion, because collusion is sort of a fake crime. We don't really know what it means. It could mean, treason. It could mean election fraud. It could be a catch-all term for a lot of things. But now we're zeroing in on a target that could be obstruction of justice, which we know has hung up other presidents. And so I don't know where this is going to go, but I think we have to remain focused on the fact that this investigation is not about obstruction of justice per se, but it's about the campaign, sanctions, and the cyber warfare campaign that Russia conducted against the United States. Those three things are somehow intermingled, and that is what Mueller is going to find out.
Although, Scott, as you know, I mean, a lot of times there are these investigations, and it ends up being, it's so many times it's actually a cliche in Washington. It's not the crime, it's the cover-up.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we've seen people time and again go down for obstruction in line when there was no underlying crime committed at all. I think it's important to remember that the president still denies that he said in the Oval Office, you should go easy on Mike Flynn. We talk about this moment a lot, but the president denies that that happened. And so until we get under oath testimony on that, we don't know if that actually occurred. One thing that struck me over the weekend was on Friday, Ty Cobb, the president's lawyer, I thought his statement about Flynn's pleading guilty was amateurish, frankly, to argue that Flynn's an Obama administration person. And then Dowd, copping to having written the tweet on Saturday, I sure as heck hope the president's getting better legal advice from these guys and he's getting PR advice, because to me, that was a horrific 2 days coming out of the president's legal team that did not help this situation at all.
And Paul, as I mentioned, the president's lawyer, John Dowd, telling Axios, quote, the president cannot obstruct justice because he's the chief law enforcement officer under the Constitution's Article 2 and has every right to express his view of any case. President Clinton was impeached for obstruction of justice.
And never claimed that the Constitution immunized him and put him above the law. We fought it and won in the trial in the Senate. He was found not guilty. But we didn't say he's above the law. Nixon suggested after he was gone in that interview we had with David Frost that perhaps presidents can't commit certain crimes. But this is a flat-out statement from the President of the United States through his attorney that he's above the law. And it's really remarkable since he's his own worst witness, our president, right? He told, after the White House concocted this ridiculous story that they fired Comey because Comey was just too mean to Hillary, right? He then confessed on national television to Lester Holt of NBC that when I fired him, I was thinking of this Russia business. I fired Comey because of Russia. Now we know that he also potentially obstructed justice at the front end of it.
If there was ever a president who's going to play constitutional chicken, it is President Trump. He's saying I am above the law, and he is daring other people to say no. What if Mueller doesn't have a criminal indictment? That would be a really high standard. Probably, I don't know if it's going to happen, but I could say confidently it'd be unlikely. Is he a president who would dare the House to impeach him and the Senate to convict him? Absolutely.
I think.
Well, in fairness to Dowd, there is really a very much an open constitutional question about whether a president can be indicted for obstruction of justice or anything, of murder or stealing cars. I mean, the idea of whether a sitting president can be indicted. The problem with what Dowd said is it suggests that he can't even be impeached for obstruction of justice. And that's what we know is wrong historically, as we know from Nixon and Clinton. And it's just wrong legally. The House of Representatives decides what's an impeachable offense. It is much more a political process than a legal process.
Everybody stick around. We've got lots more to talk about President Trump and questions about obstruction of justice and some breaking news in our next block. Don't go anywhere.